Welcome to the Ignite You podcast.
Where two bros journey into all things spirituality and human transformation.
Let's get it.
Welcome, everybody, to an episode of Ignite You. It is Ryan Miller.
And Cam McDougall.
And today we're going into a deep topic. We're talking about releasing suppressed emotions, otherwise known as exorcising demons. That's how I like to say, at least.
Sounds intense.
Sounds intense. And the reason we want to bring this up is because the other day when we did the episode on full expression, I brought up my experience with Cam, my first real, visceral, intense breathwork experience. I brought that up, and we're like, we should actually dive into that more as a topic and into Cam's journey with breath, how he got into that. And so, just to recap, if you didn't listen to it, but I would say go back and re-listen to it.
The link will be in the show notes.
It'll be there in the notes for the show. For me, with breath work, and I was telling Cam about this actually just before we hopped on, I've done some breath work before that time, but it was kind of on the softer side. And it was like, you know, we would still do 1 hour blocks of breath, but it would be more gentle and more just intuitive breathe, how you want to breathe and tune into that. So it was like when Cam said, you know, let's do a breath work session, let's drop into that. I was like, oh yeah, I've done breath work before. I'm familiar with this practice. I feel, you know, I'm good in this. So let's do it. And you were talking about the intensity leading up to it, and we were setting intentions and going to these deeper pieces of potential trauma to come up. It's like, okay, this is some new pieces here that I haven't experienced, but willing to dive in. And going into the breath, it was by far the most condensed version of healing I've ever experienced. So in like 45 minutes to an hour of like actual breathing, it felt like 25 years of therapy. I say that to everybody that I've experienced it with. It was profound. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was playful. It was scary. It brought up things I didn't even know I had stored inside of me. And I was snotting, drooling, screaming, crying, laughing, rolling. Everything was occurring all at once, basically. And it's fucking intense. I can't even relate it to anything except closely maybe to plant medicine. Mm-hmm. And it's fucking beautiful. And this is the breath, people. This is using the breath. And so we want to dive into this today with Cam because of this medicine. It's a fucking medicine. The way that breath can be used to release suppressed emotions and so many other things, of course, which we'll dive into. But first off, like, how did you even get into this work in the first place? How did you find breath work? Like, where did this come about for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I love hearing your experience. And it was so cool because we knew each other at that point, but not like that well.
Yeah.
Like we were kind of homies. We'd hung out a couple times, but we didn't really know each other on a very deep level. And we went in on that journey like together, like deep. It was a beautiful experience. And my first kind of, I guess, experience with breathwork was very similar. My friend Lucas Mack, massive shout out to this man. He's a beautiful, beautiful soul. Love this man. He brought me in on my first journey. And he, when I moved to Bali, was like, yo, dude, come over. I offer breath work. Like, I'd love to offer you a session as a homie. Like, just come and check it out. And I went, and I've been into meditation. I had done Wim Hof. I had, experienced a lot of these different forms of more performance breath work. And I was not prepared for what was about to happen. It was very similar to what you were saying. It was like I went in kind of like, yeah, this is going to be cool.
Yeah.
I'd played with psychedelics. I'd played with altered states. But the way Lucas held me and the way he guided me through this experience was an absolutely mind-bending, reality-altering experience for me. Mm-hmm. Where I quite literally had a full conversation with my higher self and my inner child. And I was the conduit between the two of us. And my higher self was like, you're here to serve the breath. You have this gift. And Lucas is opening you up to this gift. Keep leaning in, keep moving in. And as I went deeper into this, because I was like, wow, I was having a full-on psychedelic trip. Like, if people ask me, oh, I don't think DMT is released in breathwork, I'm like, you're full of shit. Like, it most definitely is. But the interesting thing here was, as I went deeper into this experience, it was like a flash book or flip book, flash book, either way, was blasted through my mind. And like I could see every single bad thing I had ever done or that had happened to me. It was like boom, 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 boom. And I remember being like crying and screaming and moving and remembering these experiences. And don't forget, like I grew up in and out of juvenile detention. I was a violent little boy. You know, I was a violent teen. I was an angry person. I did a lot of really bad shit. So all of these moments were just coming, and every single one had a different feeling and a different emotion. And I was just exploding and crying and laughing and screaming. And it was like I was releasing all of these parts of me that I didn't know were still living inside of me. And so for me, it was this experience of living such dark, traumatic experiences, moving down the path of consciousness to get out of the game when I was younger, diving into meditation, starting to explore the breath like pranayama, Wim Hof, these other more softer modalities or performance-based modalities. And then ultimately getting linked up with Lucas, who was, you know, he doesn't practice the exact same breath work that I do, but it's very similar in a way that it just cracked me open to really letting these demons, these parts of myself come to the surface to be acknowledged and ultimately expressed and moved.
Whoa. Like the flashbook, flashcard, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That version of these memories just flickering through is crazy, man. I actually I haven't heard this story told in this way from you before, so it's really cool to hear. That's what happened to me in Bufo. And so actually to hear that, it's a very similar, like all the things that happen. Yeah. So I can relate to that.
And Bufo, for those of you that don't know, is smoking like the purest form of DMT, 5-MeO.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very intense.
Very intense.
There'll be another episode on plant medicines and things like this. But it's amazing how similar these experiences can be. Like that's one of the highest forms of plant medicine you can get, the most intense in a short period of time. And that came to you in breathwork. Yeah. So what you're talking about right now, this is like your first that was
my first real moment with it, and after that, you know, it was pretty cool because Lucas, Hella, and my partner at the time, Victoria, were all these breathwork wizards, right? They still are. Like, you know, you can see Lucas and Hella on Aubrey Marcus. Victoria is now building a whole other breathwork company. Like they're absolutely pioneers and leaders in this industry. And I got to then step into their footsteps and follow them. And I remember being like, yo, I feel like I have to serve this medicine. And so over the course of it, they taught me a lot of what they knew. I had facilitated retreats with them. I would facilitate smaller things with Victoria. You know, massive shout out to Victoria. She taught me so much about her wizardry and what she knew and really opened me up to this gift that I had. And then I obviously got certified and became a huge breathwork nerd and just ran hundreds of sessions on myself, like just going so deep and screaming and moving and, you know, just really getting intimate with this form of healing. And over the course of that, and I still am, you know, just working on removing these traumas, you know, from myself, because, you know, when you've had guns pointed at your face or you've had the shit literally kicked out of you or you've been handcuffed and beat up by cops or you've been threatened for your life multiple times or you have to sleep with a machete under your pillow for years of your life, like that ingrains in your nervous system. And I still deal with stuff from those days. And so for me, it's getting to this place where I want to free myself from those emotions, and breathwork has just been the most powerful way for me to actually, in a intentional, contained way, go back into those experiences and express now what wasn't able to be expressed in those moments. Yeah.
And those traumas are really intense and potentially not relatable to people listening, but of course, like, a trauma is a trauma. However you relate to it, it could be any act, any
car accident, it could be stubbing your toe. You know, it could be emotional abuse. It can be, you know, anything that has an emotional charge and a chemical reaction in the body that makes a lasting impact on you, regardless of how, relatively insane or not it is, based on what society deems as crazy or not. It's all trauma.
Yeah. Your version of a machete under your pillow. There
Totally.
you go. So with this, like, because you're certified in this is like what you work in, for people to understand, like, how does breath surface traumas? Like, how does that tie in? Like, you're breathing. Yes, I get that. And trauma's coming up through it. I've experienced it. Like, I know it to be true, but the mechanism behind it, like, how does breath become a gateway to specifically trauma coming up and being released? How does this happen?
Yeah, beautiful. I love that question. And so for trauma to come up to the surface, it needs to be reactivated. It needs to be stimulated, right? Like if you think about PTSD, for instance, like sometimes if, a motorcycle backfires or something, that sounds like a gunshot. So it can trigger a traumatic response in a veteran, right? That's because that trauma is living in the body and it needs a form of stimulus to come to the surface. Breath work, when done in the right ways, stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, right? So if you sit and you take some breaths just in and out, like really fast through your mouth, like some people will say, oh, I'm getting anxious. Or some people will say, oh, I'm getting sad. Or some people will be like, ooh, I feel super energized. You're turning your sympathetic nervous system on. So you're starting to activate. When you get to a certain state in breath work and you actually follow the patterns, you actually start to enter a state of hypnosis almost as you follow a breathing pattern. So not only are you stimulating your sympathetic nervous system, but as you go deeper into this hypnosis, it's almost like a mantra, right? You start to leave your conscious mind. You start to dip out of the prefrontal cortex, right? Your thinking mind, your analytical mind. And you dip into your limbic brain. You dip into the subconscious. You dip into the more primal side of your being. And so you follow these patterns, you follow this breathing, you stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight mechanism, which is what is responsible for generally most traumatic reactions or suppressions. You bypass the analytical mind, the thinking mind, and you let what comes to the surface come to play. For instance, if someone's in a car accident, right? Crazy car accident. They get out of that car accident, if they're still alive, right? They get out of that car accident. They're shaking, right? Shaking. Society has deemed that shaking is a bad thing, right? It's weird. Don't do that. You're making me uncomfortable. So what do? We stop it. We clench it. We hold it. We use the analytical mind to suppress a physiological function that helps us discharge energy. That's what shaking is. It's your body discharging energy, adrenaline, norepinephrine, all these things. Like it's your body discharging. Like if you look at a gazelle in nature, right? The lion either eats it or it gets away. If it gets away, it goes and lies in the grass and it shakes until it stops, and then it's on with its life. It just moves on. Humans don't. We swallow it. We gulp it down. We tuck that shaking away. And so over the course of our lives, we carry that energy. And here's the interesting thing is that time is a concept of the mind, right? Your body doesn't have the concept of time. So it holds on to these traumas or these emotions or these experiences, especially when we suppress them, without an idea of it being over or not. It still thinks it's going on. So when you're able to use these breathing patterns and dip into the subconscious, dropping out of the thinking mind and letting the sympathetic nervous system come back up and activate, that trauma generally will follow. And so, in the breath work that I do, there's a lot of pressure point, a lot of body work, right? And so if you see that someone's like holding tension in their shoulder and you go in and you use a pressure point on their clavicle, right? Or in their armpit or something like that, and you agitate that area, boom, that trauma will come to the surface and that person can relive it.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to that because Cam did that for me. One of the scenarios we had, and Cam's really intuitive with this and works really well. I mean, intuition's obviously one piece, but you can just read the body. You know the anatomy, how the body moves. He made me get on all fours, which already felt challenging for me to do around another man, and then pressed a trigger point on my neck, which then brought me straight back to an experience I had with my father that I didn't know I was storing in my memory, and I was able to heal it right in that moment. So just for instance of what happened to me and how healing that was something that was so uncomfortable and it felt so hard to do, and then he touched that area on my body and I was like, oh, I can release that. I don't need to hold that anymore. I didn't even know I had that. So that's fucking beautiful, man.
Well, the body, you know, and thank you for that description, because I think that's very relatable and it's a firsthand experience with it. The body holds on to stuff, and the body has memory, right? There's this concept of muscle memory in fitness, but your whole body is wired. You have neurological plexes in your heart and your gut everywhere, right? Like your glands are all intelligent centers of your body. You know, and we think that the brain and what we perceive is all we hold on to. And it's like, no, you know, we talk about this in our challenges all the time, this process of neurulation and how, you know, our central nervous system is sending and receiving information, you know, 7 weeks into, you know, us becoming an embryo. It's like these things are stored in us and we sometimes don't even know. And so you'll deal with people that are like, I don't know why I'm anxious. Like I have such bad anxiety. And they're like, I live a pretty good life. And then it's like, cool, let's get you out of your conscious mind into your subconscious. Let's poke and prod a little bit in a container where you're safe and you're held and you're seen. And let's see what comes to the surface. Because, you know, I've had clients where they've totally suppressed the fact that they've had sexual trauma, or sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as children, if something traumatic like that happens, the body's very intelligent, right? The mind's very intelligent. What does it do? Blocks you off from that, protects you from it. Gets you to a place where you don't have to think about it. The challenge is that still living in you? Yeah. It's still there.
Yes.
Regardless of if it's in your conscious awareness or your memory bank or not, your body has stored that.
So on that, this topic, like it sounds like there's lots of beautiful healing in this process. It sounds dandy, right? We're taking these really scary things, or like all these traumas, all these things, getting healed through breath. And that also makes me think, okay, this is an intense process. So what could go wrong here? When thinking about like somebody looking for breath work, looking for this, like, oh, this sounds great, I want to do it. Like, even though, you know, it doesn't sound fun, but it sounds like, oh, this is an opportunity to heal. I want some of this. Like, what can go wrong? Like, what's possible for re-traumatizing? What's possible in this space that's so sensitive and open?
Yeah, great question. I think with all healing modalities, it's so important to have reverence. Because you are opening yourself up to some pretty heavy shit.
Yeah.
Like you really are. There's no way around it. And just to be clear, breathwork sessions can sometimes be extremely blissful and beautiful.
Yeah, of course.
Right? You can have breathwork sessions that feel like you're just filled with light and you're having a perpetual orgasm for an hour. That's a good time. You know, so it's not always like you're going into the depths of your trauma. However, you are opening yourself up. All right? So on a more entry level, you're opening yourself up to memories and experiences that you might not necessarily be aware of in yourself. So that can be very emotionally challenging. That can be very emotionally confronting. If you go into a session and you're like, well, this happened. And you're like, holy shit, this is changing how I see my whole life. So you have to be ready. You know, and I think the most important thing for all of, you know, everyone who's looking to enter this healing space is you really have to get yourself to a place where you have support around you that will help you integrate what comes up, right? Yeah. Because there are dangers to this, you know, there are certain people that will have experiences that cause them to have, you know, borderline psychotic breaks sometimes. It can happen. I personally have never had that happen. I think it's because of the prep I give my clients as well as the integration and how discerning I am with which clients I serve. But at the same time, it's like you want to be in a place where you're curious and you're open. And one of the most important things I tell people is like you got to be playful with it. You got to go in and even though it is trauma, even though it is like go in with an investigator's energy. Yeah. Like I'm going to explore my body and I'm not going to identify with what's coming up and I'm going to allow. I also believe that the body knows how much you can handle. And so if you can find that edge where you're challenging the body enough that you're able to go into these states, but you're not pushing it beyond what it really is able to handle, you're going to find a good line, right? You're going to find a good space. So always try to flirt that line and trust the body, because the body generally, unlike plant medicine, like breathing, you got to breathe. Yeah. So a lot of times people will tap out, right? So you'll see in a session, someone will be breathing, emotions start coming. You can see that they're starting to have a vision or an experience, and then they just stop breathing and they dip out. And then they stop sometimes breathing for 5 to 10 minutes because the body's resetting its carbon dioxide levels. And then they come back and like, wow, that was beautiful. And you're like, you were coming up against something and you tapped out. Not consciously, but the body held that person back. So there are checks and balances in the body that can really help. But at the same time, if you force it, it can sometimes go a little sideways.
So on that, interested, because people listening might be like, oh, okay, my body's telling me I really don't like to mouth breathe. So my mouth gets dried up whenever I do that. I don't want to do, we didn't talk about how it looks, but usually a circular mouth breathing when it comes to this kind of work. So it's like, no, that's not for me. My body doesn't want that. You could play that card. So for that kind of block around like even getting into the breath of like, oh, it's probably not for me. What do you say to that? Do you say this is for everybody? Do you say this is for a select group of people? Do you have to have a trauma in mind to do this? And like people kind of getting into like, who's it for? And if they have that body block, when you say listen to your body, does that also make sense to the idea of like, I'm not supposed to breathe like that?
I would say it's very practitioner dependent.
Okay.
So if you're like, oh, breath work doesn't feel good for me and I don't enjoy it, and you haven't probably found the practitioner that's for you. For me, we have light breathers, we have strong breathers. They both have very different experiences. Both have very profound experiences, right? So if I'm working with somebody and they come in and they're like, I really don't like to breathe, it makes me anxious. I'm going to get them into a state where they're not thinking about that anxiety and they're comfortable breathing in a way that they feel comfortable with me there. And then I'll push them. I'll dip them in and I'll dip them out, and I'll dip them in and I'll dip them out. Right? So it's really important that you find somebody that's willing to work with you. If you go to a practitioner and they're like, you can only do this and only that, otherwise you can't breathe, and like, peace out, A-Town, bro. Like, I ain't having that shit. That person has to be able to read your energy and work with you, because I have sessions with people where they don't move. They won't have any catharsis whatsoever. And sometimes I'm like, is this person even breathing? And then they'll come out after the integration music and they'll be like, I just had a full conversation with my higher self. I had a conversation with my dead grandma. I went to see my other family in the Pleiades and I just took off. Yeah. And you're like, holy shit, like that's profound. Right? So it's important to know that yes, your body will guide you. And it's also important to know that just because you have those limitations doesn't mean that breathwork's not for you. It probably just means that you haven't found the right person that's going to work with you in a way that's going to get you to where you want to go, because everybody can benefit from breathwork.
Okay. Yeah. So
everybody. Yeah. I don't care what anybody says.
I mean, we're all breathing here, right?
Everybody breathes. And everyone has different modalities of it. And even in the workshops that I run and we run, it's like, find your pace.
Yes.
Right? Find your pace. And I'm going to push you. And I'm going to stimulate you in ways. But at the same time, it's like, it is your journey. So don't judge. Just open up to it. Lean in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for people listening to this, maybe not having access to a group to go to or able to go to a practitioner right now, like what are ways to kind of get started in this area, or like tools they can use? Because we're talking about exercising demons here, right? We're talking about
well, that
and supporting.
Yeah. Well, that's it's funny. So I'll get into tools in a second. Yeah. I just don't want to. I want to say also that on the topic of what can go wrong.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a cosmic dude. I love the cosmic shit. So I started with the entry level stuff.
Okay,
now I want to talk about the next
demons.
level stuff.
Let's get there.
You're opening yourself up to other realms of consciousness in breathwork.
Yes.
You are opening yourself up to other dimensions of reality. When I hold space for people in breath work, I bring through divine guidance. I bring through my guides. I bring through my ancestors. I bring through my higher self. Okay? It's very important as a person who's going into these spaces. It's like ayahuasca. It's like bufo. It's like even psilocybin, all these different types of ceremonies. You are opening yourself up to beings, entities, spirits, all these different things. So you got to make sure that A, you're going to a container that's tight. And you're also going to a place where, you know, you really trust the person to be able to hold the energy of the room, right? Because like a shaman, you know, I'm not comparing myself to a shaman per se, but it's a similar thing that we do in a sense. That shaman is there to orchestrate the energy. That shaman's not there to come and like hold you if you're crying. That shaman's there to control the energy, the entities, the spirits of the room. And I think a lot of people neglect this, especially Western practitioners for the most part, is because we're so rooted in science that we think that everything we can see and touch is all that matters. But you're opening yourself up to some pretty powerful spiritual energy here. So something that can go wrong is if you go to the wrong place and it's not the right practitioner and you're doing it in a place that has entities or energies around that aren't conducive to your healing, you can have other things latch onto you. You can have these other, and whether you want to call that just like, oh, I heard someone do something and it was emotion that triggered something in me that's now living in me, or you want to say that you were possessed by a demon. You know, both the same. One will be more relatable to people than others. But you have to know that, you know, the container is everything. Really, truly is. So just be mindful of that when you start these practices. You are opening yourself up to your subconscious mind or other realms of consciousness and other entities and beings.
Yeah.
Right.
The practitioner is a big one. Like, who are you getting this from? And I think that for me, and some things I looked out for and knew with anybody I've learned from or gotten breathwork journey, like an experience from, I've known that person on a pretty deep level. Like for you, for instance, like we've hung out a few times. I know you. I'm like, oh, this is a pure soul. Like Cam is a great person with good intentions. And I can tell he can hold down the grid. Like this man is powerful. So I knew that. Going into a space, like have you gone into a space where you don't really know the practitioner yet, you don't know the teacher, but you're like, I'm going to go there, I'm going to trust you. Maybe you heard through a friend, or like, how do you ground into that piece? Because it sounds like there's lots of risk in it, of course. You're fully open. Have you gone to where you didn't know the practitioner, but you trusted in X, maybe a friend or the location or whatever, and then potentially gotten there and been like, nah, this isn't it? Or like, how do you kind of go with that piece? Like somebody that wants to go to one, but maybe doesn't know the practitioner themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And then after I answer this, I'll get to some tools and some ways for people to get started, because it'll kind of lead into that. So I've kind of been spoiled in breathwork. I won't lie. Like I actually have. You know, Victoria, Lucas, and Hella, you know, we'll post their Instagrams and stuff in the comments as well, so you can go check all them out. But they're really fucking good at what they do. And I was able to really get an insight into what really heartfelt, powerful breath work is like. And I was able to, you know, cultivate and create my own version of that from these powerful beings, these powerful humans. I don't know. If you know Lucas beings. And Hella, they're more beings than humans. They're amazing. I love it so much. But at the same time, it's really important to know that, you know, you got to be discerning in where you go with your breath work. And for me, I've been spoiled. You know, I could call on those guys whenever I wanted, or call on those humans whenever I wanted. We're really trying to stop saying guys. We don't like saying it. Call on those humans and be like, hey, can you hold me? I have been to experiences. We were just talking about it actually when we were making cacao before this episode, where I didn't feel held. And I actually had an experience in Bali where I went to a breathwork journey, and the practitioner actually told me to calm down and actually resisted my expression. And if I wasn't a practitioner and had been able to maintain my awareness and my power in what I wanted and needed to bring through in that moment, it could have been a big challenge, right?
Especially re-traumatize you.
For sure, especially for someone like me who has a story and a trauma of being too much. Right? So, you know, that was an experience where I was like, ooh, I wouldn't go back to that container. And I never did for healing again after that. And it's funny because the people that were running it were my friends, and there was like a whole vibe to it. But I was like, I'm not attached to that place anymore. I don't really like the vibe out for breath work and deep healing. And at the same time, like, you know, I know a lot of practitioners, and some are good and some are flat out just not in it. You know, it's not that they're bad. It's just they don't put the reverence into it. So what I would say is do your research, do your diligence, you know, spend time getting to know these people, you know, watch their Instagrams, you know, go into their world and, you know, see what you can and watch testimonials and reach out to people who have had sessions from these people, because that's going to be your best insight into it. Because it's like, for me, it's like, I would never sit with a shaman that wasn't recommended to me. You know, I'd never go into an ayahuasca ceremony because it's like, they're like, we have ayahuasca. Not a fucking chance.
Yeah, there's like an ad in a cafe for
it's
ayahuasca.
like a flyer.
Okay,
yeah, it's
I'll
like,
do that.
sick. Pull this number and come. You know, we do them every Tuesday at 4.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, no, I would never go. It's like, check. I want that. I would never go to that.
Yeah.
So you want to do your diligence, because let's be honest. You're playing with some of the deepest dark shit inside of you. You know, that needs to be treated as a very important, very, you know, fragile practice.
Ceremonial.
And it's
in a
ceremonial.
sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you've seen how I roll. It's like we cleanse, we pray, we spend hours getting things ready in a physical space for ceremony to go down. I spend days getting myself into state if I'm going into a very deep ceremony. It's like you want to make sure you're a clear vessel. Right? You really, truly do. So we really want to make sure that the ceremony side of it is there, that the reverence side of it is there, and that there's really people behind it that know what they're doing. For sure. Because let's be honest, like, everybody and their dog is now a breathwork practitioner.
Yeah.
Like,
it's easy to get certified.
It is. It's like people go for a weekend and they're like, yep, running events. It's like CrossFit now. You know, like, comparing, you know, as a strength and conditioning coach, I think about a CrossFit coach. So I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you go for a weekend and you could open up a gym and run people through Olympic lifting. And you're just kind of like, wait, I had to learn that stuff over like 2 years as a strength and conditioning coach, and you're doing it in a weekend. So
yeah, and to be clear, we're speaking about a very specific type of breath. Of course, there's pranayama. There's other types of breathing where it's like, there's these breathwork practitioners. For instance, we have a good friend down here that's a pranayama master.
Yeah.
But she doesn't go into trauma, into that space. It's more just, you know, calming the system, relaxing the body, nadi shodhana, where you're kind of alternate nostril breathing, these different kinds of practices that are softer, and that's what it's for. Yeah. It's mixed with yoga, it's mixed with these other practices. We're talking about
trauma release.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you know, I love that you brought that up, because breath work is very wide in its breadth, right? In its breadth.
In its breadth. It is wide in its breadth.
In its breadth. Breadth?
What?
I don't know. You know, breadth, like thick, like wideness. I don't know. Anyways.
You just make up words?
I don't think I made that word up.
Maybe.
Fact checkers.
Let us know.
Fact checkers out there. Did I just make a word up?
Breadth.
The breadth of experience. Not breadth of experience. Breadth of experience.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. Very, very, very important to know, okay, that breath work has a lot of different avenues. And if it comes to, like, if you're somebody that's like, I want to control my anxiety, nadi shodhana, you know, pranayama, these things are beautiful for that, right? You know, there's so many different forms.
Yeah.
And the reason that I got into what I got into is that I'm very fascinated and very interested in trauma. Because for me, releasing trauma is an extremely important aspect of us living from our full expression and ultimately living from our truth. Because I, for so many years, lived from a place of pain. I lived from a place of hesitation. I lived from a place of feeling like I was broken and unable to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And shit, like, I still deal with this stuff. Like, to this day, I have stories that come up and beliefs that come up. And I still have moments where I wake up in the middle of the night and I feel like, oh my God, did I lock the door? Is someone coming to get me? Right? Like, and these are all things that hold me back from feeling like I want to feel and living how I want to live. And so for me, the trauma aspect of this became so important. And we thought it was really important to bring up, especially after the full expression episode, because to be honest, let's use jumping off a cliff as an example, right? So fun. A lot of people want to do it. A lot of people get to the top and they can't move.
Yeah.
What is that? That's a freeze response. Freeze response is rooted in trauma, right? So it's really important to know that a lot of times when we freeze at the top of a cliff, or we freeze when we're trying to do a presentation, or maybe we freeze when we're driving or playing sports or trying to move or whatever, it's like that's blocking you from some form of your life that you obviously want to explore. So let's get into the inner workings of what's kinking the system. Let's remove that so that you can live. You can ignite. You can be who you want to be and show up how you want to show up, because that's what you came to this world to do, is to learn, to feel, to grow, and to alchemize your pain and your challenges into your power, into your purpose.
Ooh, sounds good. That sounds yummy. I want all that. On that, let's get into the tools, dude. What are some ways for people to start approaching this now? Like right away after listening to this, or when these little things come up? Like I imagine, like you're saying, when you have these moments, you have a whole toolkit of things to use right away, right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's not that you stay with that. You know, you can sit with it, but you have tools and ways to navigate it.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, the first is our app.
Of course.
You know, getting on the embodied app ASAP Rocky, like as quick as you can, because we guide you through breath, movement, meditation in a beautiful way, in a fun way, in a way that guides you exactly on what to do with 5 minute, 10 minute, 15, 20, all these different versions. So that would be the first thing I would say, just do it. And honestly, like, I'm plugging our stuff, but it's really
dope.
Sick. It's like, it's amazing.
So it's what we wanted. It's what we want now. So we built that out. Us 1 year ago would have been the best thing ever.
The best thing ever
to have implemented. Yeah,
totally. So getting on the embodied app right away. And we have free trials for our listeners and stuff like that. So you can get in. We have like smaller snippets and all that stuff. So you can kind of check it out and feel the vibe. But starting a daily practice of connecting with your breath. I would also recommend, seeking out a practitioner, right? I'm not saying you got to come to me. I'm harder to get a hold of these days for stuff, especially with where I live, but seeking out a practitioner where you are, okay? One that can actually work with you in the physical. That's ideal. Online is good. We do them on our challenges, and I do them for my clients. And at the same time, when it comes to trauma release, being there in the physical allows for you to go deeper and allows for me to hold you deeper. Online works well, but generally there's some resistance, and I can't trigger, like what Ryan was talking about. I can't trigger these points in your body to stimulate you in the same way. So it's a little more challenging, but in that way, it actually blocks how deep you go, which makes it a little safer. And other than that, I would just say, one thing that really helped me at the beginning of this journey was I read a book. My dad gave me this book called The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh. And in that book, you should definitely read that book. Everyone should read that book. It's so beautiful. And it's super small, super thin. Thich
Nhat Hanh is good with the way he writes.
Quick to the point. Yeah. And there's an exercise in that called the breath body. And he says, just sit in meditation and inhale, feel the whole breath body. And you say that to yourself, and then you exhale, feel the whole breath body. Inhale, feel the whole breath body. And basically, I can't remember what the layout is. It's been probably like 4 years now since I read this book, but in that he says, do 10, 20, 30 of these breaths. And if you ever, if your mind wanders away from feeling the whole breath body, start again from zero and keep going until you get to the amount you commit to. And I think that's a really important one, because a lot of times people aren't very aware of their breath. And then the moment that you tell them to be aware of their breath, it makes them anxious. They haven't really gotten to a place where they're comfortable, observing their breath and controlling their breath. So that's a great exercise in a very soft way to get you to a place where you're starting to dance with your breath. Because let's be honest, a breathwork journey is you dancing with your breath. And the first 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes 15, sometimes 20, for people can be very arduous, right? It can be very like, damn it, this is so much work. I call it breath work. You know what I mean? Like it takes work. So the more intimate you are with that and controlling that space and learning to work with the breath in that way, the easier it's going to go, right? And finally, what I would say is it's also a big mindset shift. And this is going to challenge a lot of people, but where there's resistance, there's potential, right? It's as simple as that. And if you're resistant to something, that doesn't mean you got to just be a bull in a china shop and just run in full tilt and get it done, because that's also an integrated way of approaching it. But where there's resistance, there's opportunity for growth. So if you're resistant to the breath and you're like, I just don't like it, it makes my mouth dry, which is what a lot of people say, do breath work with a bottle of water next to you. Take a sip of water every once in a while. Don't let that be the block, because if that's the block, then there's obviously something for you there that you just don't want to see yet. So get to a place where you see this resistance as an opportunity, as a challenge. And that's where you start to really get benefits from breath work, is where you go in and you're like, all right, I see this as a challenge. But that challenge is an opportunity, because, breath work gets hard. You go into some shit. A lot of times as you start feeling things or seeing things, you're like, oh, I don't want to see this. I don't want to. So you have to develop this state of mind where you're just like, I'm going in and I'm breathing into this more and I'm feeling it more. And you hear me when I run it, I'm like, you're feeling the resistance. You're feeling all this pain. You're feeling this sadness, these emotions, like breathe into them, feel them more, allow for them to come through, because you want to get intimate with that. And the more intimate you get with that, the more the experience expands and the more you feel. And, emotions are energy in motion. So the more you can feel those emotions, the more you're going to move them. So if you were scared in a traumatic experience that's stuck in your body, and the more you allow yourself to feel that fear while remaining aware that you're safe, that's the key here. Remaining aware that you're safe, not becoming the experience again, you start to move it out of your system. And that's why after breath work, people are like, oh my God, I feel so light and so
orgasmic.
Orgasmic.
It's true.
It's true though. It is. And people have orgasms all the time, but they feel so good because you're not tense in that spot. You've let that emotion move. You've cleared out. You've titrated that one piece of your experience.
Yeah. And again, people, these breathwork tools are in the app. So we have ways for you to navigate them daily for your practice, like Cam's talking about. The ways to start using and getting into this work and start releasing is all in the app. We have that built out for you guys. And even some things that I'm thinking about now, like from the 5 to Feel Alive that we talked about in the Full Expression episode, like a few of those pieces also apply here, right? When it comes to moving emotion.
For sure.
Yeah.
100%. And, that's really what we want to get into here is breath work is a great conduit for catharsis and letting the emotions come to the surface. So, things like roaring, things like, really getting out there, letting primal screams out, things like moving and dancing and shaking and pulsing. And, I love Osho for this because
all the weird shit
he would have, if you've ever done Osho dynamic meditation,
so
it's like,
good.
Holy
it's weird.
You're like, I think in his one that's called Osho dynamic, he says, go absolutely mad for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Like you lose yourself. Yeah. And I remember doing that at a breathwork training, like just going bonkers. Like you're eating grass, you're ripping your clothes, you're fully going completely quote unquote insane. But the more that you can allow for yourself to express in these ways, you're going to let your body's intelligence move what needs to move. Because here's the thing, your body knows what it needs to do in order to get the stuff out. Yeah. Right? I've hit a person's psoas, and when I say hit, I mean like I've applied pressure to clients' psoas in breath work, and the legs just start running. They'll be running on the mat so fast the person might be screaming, moving, right? And then they relax, they come back. Yeah. And then at the end they say, wow, I had this experience when I was younger where I couldn't run away. And then they're like, now I feel like I was actually able to run, and that it's gone. But you have to get to a place where you're okay with running and screaming on a mat. Because a lot of times people would be like, are people looking at me? You know, is it going to be weird? Can I actually do this? You know, so the more we can get in tune with roaring and letting emotion guide us and just really being open to what wants to come through as the body's intelligence, the more we're going to heal.
Get closer to your full expression. Get closer and closer and more into your full expression. It's going to allow you to feel fucking excited for life and allow you to release suppressed emotions and so many other things, people.
And exercise the demons.
Exercise them demons.
I love that. I love that. One thing I just want to close with here, and this is very specific to trauma. If you are somebody dealing with trauma, it's very important that you, like I said, find somebody that knows what they're doing. Find someone that can hold you in your wild, okay? And at the same time, you learn to really focus your awareness on the experiences taking place in your body, not becoming them, okay? You really want to make sure that we create separation between the experience and us. And that's the most important thing when it comes to releasing suppressed emotions or exercising the demons.
Oh, exercise. I was like, I could have been anything.
It could have been. I caught you off guard. Exercising the demons is that you remain aware of the expression. You remain aware of what's taking place in your body. Okay? You don't become it. Because what happens in a lot of these circumstances, and one of the major dangers is re-traumatization, when we become the expression and we forget that we are to maintain an awareness and separation of the expression, we can get ourselves into trouble. So very important to just really focus on harnessing that awareness, right? And going in with intention, right? Like for instance, if you're going to roar, right? If you're going out into the forest to roar, it's like, why do you want to roar? What's that feeling? What's the expression? Maybe like you weren't heard as a child, so you want to go and be heard. So you're like, okay, I am Cam, age 36, going into the forest to roar because I was not heard as a child when I was 6. I'm going to let myself express that as I was watching the 6-year-old express it. I'm not going to become the 6-year-old.
Yes.
Right? Because if we become the 6-year-old and then we roar and then someone comes up and is like, shut up, you know, from down the street, we're going to be like, oh my God, I just did that thing again. Boom, you're back in the same cycle. But if someone comes up and is like, shut up, you'd be like, hey, my 6-year-old's just roaring right now to clear his trauma. Let him be. You have that awareness. You're able to express it. So you don't become the emotion. You just allow for it to come to the surface.
Yeah. And you're owning it.
And
you're your own healer.
Yes.
In this process. So we talked a lot about looking out for practitioners, finding these people. And with these tools, you are your own healer. You're able to show up for yourself every day. So when you can look at it like that, these different parts, unintegrated parts, younger parts of you get to show up for those parts and heal it.
This is that radical ownership that we always talk about.
That's
it's like,
it.
This is all on you guys. It's like, even as someone that facilitates, it's like you can lead a horse to water, but you got to drink. You know what I mean? And so it is up to you. And I love that. You're responsible for it. So giddy up.
So stay lit.
So stay lit.
Boom.
And lean in, you beautiful humans.
Fuck yeah.